Alright guys, how's it going? I hope you're doing well today. I just wanted to kind of just briefly talk about my upbringing really with regards to my educational experiences really. I think I briefly touched on it a bit before in some previous videos. I don't think I've ever really covered it in much depth before as far as I can remember anyway. So I thought I would do that a bit today. I'm not going to go through everything, it will take a long time, but just kind of run through the whole kind of thing as quickly as I can really. And then kind of point out a few things that I think are important to say in as far as where I think educational or why I think education often fails a lot of young people, especially in more rundown, sort of, economically, socially, maybe even culturally deprived areas, maybe depraved. Certain parts up and down across the United Kingdom, but and obviously I can only really talk about my own specific experience growing up in East Yorkshire in the 90s and early to mid 2000s. But so I grew up in a time that was dominated by both the effects of deindustrialization, declining manufacturing, increasing unemployment in the 90s, thanks to, I guess, partly thanks to decisions of the Thatcher period in the 70s and 80s. So by the time that I was growing up, the country was just about coming out of the maybe the most impactful elements of Thatcher's era, if you like. And of course then Blair got into power in 1997, and I don't really think the effects of Blair's government probably really took full force until probably very late 90s, early 2000s. So there was towards the end of the 90s, I remember there was quite a lot of optimism in the air, let's say. There was quite a bit of hope around. Of course, you had the retail boom happening, I think in the mid to late 90s. The internet had kind of just really become a kind of popular thing, although not everybody had it yet. But it had become a phenomenon by sort of mid to late 90s. Not like it is now, but it's certainly become it was on everyone's lips, and it was certainly a far cry from what the internet is today, but it was certainly becoming people were curious about it back then. It was a time of change. It was a time of, there was a lot of positivity around back then. The 90s were in full swing, and I remember the music and the fashion and things like that, and the TV shows. It was a completely different time. But having said that, I think as far as council estate-based comprehensive schools were concerned, I think from looking back on it, probably they were massively underfunded, understaffed. Certainly with regards to my secondary school, which I'll come on to in a second. I went to a normal primary school. It was a C of E, Church of England based primary school. Then, I don't know if it still is now, but it was then. So I grew up in that whole tradition of hymn singing and the Christian holidays. So we had the the Easter Harvest Festival, and obviously Christmas and whatever. Um, and so I actually really enjoyed primary school, even though I had problems there with bullying from time to time and stuff like that. And I didn't, if I may be honest, I didn't particularly like some of the, wasn't particularly too enthusiastic about some of the teachers there. And certainly, there was certainly one or two dinner ladies I didn't particularly like very well. But anyway, that's kind of besides the point. But I'd say for the most part, I enjoyed my primary school years. I enjoyed that particular school because it was right next to, bordered literally on sort of the rural area. Basically, it was literally outside the perimeter of the school field was where Headon was, which is just about heading on towards Headon. So it's just farm fields for miles and miles around behind my school, my primary school. And on a good day you could sometimes hear the factory noises and things like that coming from the I'm guessing probably coming from a Wincolmley area, probably somewhere like that. Sort of these like industrial estate areas, and obviously sounds coming from the docks as well, given that my city is a port city. So you can sometimes you'd hear the ferry, P&O ferries. Sometimes you'd hear like factory sounds, like alarms going off and things like that, and certain smells in the air. Probably coming from Wincolmley when all that stuff was still kind of operating. I assume most of that's gone now. But it was a special time actually. When I look back at it now, I had so many great memories of primary school. I had so many good times. But like I said, I did unfortunately have to deal with some. How do I put it? Particularly unpleasant individuals. And apart from that, I loved primary school. I certainly loved. I still love like getting there early in the morning, especially towards some of the last years. So this was 1999, 2000, when I used to help one of the teachers. Me and my friend at the time used to help one of the teachers, quite a hot young woman at that time anyway. I think she called Miss Beach, I think her name was. It might be mistaken. But she's quite a young, slim woman. I think she was relatively, fairly new to us. I think she'd only been there about a year or two, I think, from what I can recall now. Some almost 30 years on, whatever it is. So, and I just had fun. I had fun at primary school. I enjoyed the holidays. I enjoyed the school discos. I enjoyed the parties there, especially the Christmas parties. It was great, and it was very special to me. And my memories of that time, for the most part, are of good times. Extremely itchy head here for some reason, I don't know why. So yeah, I'd say for the most part, primary school was a good period of my life actually. So that was 93, 94 up until I thought it was 2009. It's actually 2001. I finished my primary school years, and I think it's probably midsummer 2001. I'm guessing. I remember the day they were left. I remember singing that song we used to sing, that school leavers primary school song. It's on YouTube, or I'll have to post it in the YouTube thing at some point. But and of course I got my white T-shirt signed, and it was sad actually. I was actually quite sad when I left primary school. I didn't think I would be. I was, given the, there's no easy way to put it. There were a lot of assholes, quite frankly, at my primary school. And in some ways I was glad to leave, but also kind of sad at the end. I had some good teachers there, with like Mr. Vokes, Mr. Ray, I didn't mind Mr. Page from time to time, he was okay. I liked Mrs. Mellors, I think her name was. Was it Sellers? No, I can't remember. But I remember she was, I think she was like a teacher assistant or something. She was very pleasant. She was a lovely woman. Some of the nursery school teachers, they were really lovely as well. Mrs. Benstead, I think her name was. Miss Garner, I think her name was. There was quite a few. It's hard to remember now. Obviously, it's been such a long time, but there were some really lovely teachers in that school at that time. I don't know what the school's like nowadays, but back then it was. I really enjoyed it. I loved it. It was great. But like all things, everything comes to an end. You have your time there, and you move on to your secondary school years. I think there's anything else I can really say about Overstretched Primary School. It was, I especially loved summers. I really loved summers there, looking out across the field, watching the grass maintenance, grounds maintenance contractors come in and do their work, and watching them prune trees and cut the grass, and the smell of the grass cut and all that kind of stuff. Especially like sort of mid to late spring. Sometimes I'd come to school and they'd already be there working, and I just used to love all that stuff. I was fascinated by it all. And sometimes we'd come to the school and there'd be coaches parked outside because there was a school trip that day, or sometimes there was even double deckers parked outside. I don't think they would do that now. I remember there was some private, sort of independent school companies that our primary school used to use from time to time. I don't want to make this a whole nostalgia thing here, but I feel, like I said, for the most part, I feel very lucky that I went to that school. It was given some of the. I wouldn't have minded to have gone to another primary school. Looking back, I don't know, maybe Stockwell, or maybe Andrew, not Andrew, maybe. Maybe somewhere along Holderness Road, somewhere like that. I wouldn't have minded to have gone to. But I grew up on a literally right on the outskirts of the city, in the east of the city. So my parents obviously chose somewhere that was close. Well, it wasn't. I don't think it was technically. I suppose it wasn't the closest to us really, but it was probably. I'm just glad I went to that school. Now, secondary school is a different story entirely, because this is really what this video is about. But I just felt it was important to just kind of make that point, really, because it leads into this kind of contrast of my secondary school or high school years, which were a much different story. I had great times at secondary school as well. I didn't quite enjoy secondary school, certainly initially for the first couple of years, like I did primary school. I was getting into a lot of trouble, fighting a lot of the time, and just being a bit of a tearaway, really, honestly. I kind of feel sorry for the teachers in hindsight having to deal with me, but I was barely 11, 12 years old. In year 7, year 8, I was still a kid. But then as time went on, I didn't kind of mind secondary school. I actually kind of got into it. I quite liked it. That kind of initial phase of the first year or two was troublesome. And obviously it was a much bigger school. And like a lot of people who went to that school, we had the summer school thing. I think that was just before, it must have been just before 9/11 happened. So that must have been, I'm guessing, probably June or July time, 2001. As you can tell, I could talk about this kind of stuff for hours, really. I've got so many memories, so many things. So many great things, actually. It's weird. at the time I didn't always enjoy school, but like looking back on it now, like I think I suppose I had more good memories than bad memories. I think. So I think secondary was a bit of a shock to the system because obviously it was it must have been 3 times as bigger as 3 times as more students as there were at my primary school. So having come from a relatively small school and heading into that was obviously it was difficult to deal with at first. But like everyone, you kind of adapt and get used to it over time and I didn't mind it. I wasn't, unfortunately, I wasn't academically gifted at primary. I wasn't academically gifted at secondary. Is difficult but honest truth. But I still liked being at school. I still liked going to certain classes. Like I certainly liked studying a lot of IT with Mr. Bennett, I think his name was. John Everington, God rest his soul, in the art class. He could be a bit temperamental. But he was alright. He was an alright teacher, really. But he was definitely an artist. He had that artistic kind of temperament about him. He could be. You didn't always know what kind of version of him you were going to get. Sometimes he could be problematic. Sometimes he was funny. Sometimes he could be serious. Sometimes he was supportive and motivating. But it was a complicated individual. We had a music teacher. I forget his name off the top of my head now. Was it Mr. I can't remember his name now. Miss Green. She was a wonderful teacher. Actually, she was a lovely person. She helped me in a lot of ways. She was a really lovely woman. I think she was the head teacher at some point, I think. Or assistant head or something like that. Who else did we have? Miss Bell, or Miss Wilkinson. She was our main teacher for many years. I don't know if she was throughout the entirety of that time. She was there for a period of time. But she was nice. Of course, how can I forget Mr. O'Toole? Mr. O'Toole was a great guy, wonderful teacher, wonderful man. I had a lot of time for him, I respected him greatly. Same with Mr. Bennett. And he knows why. Lovely man, great man. Trying to think now off the top of my head. It's getting more fuzzy as time's going on. I've got to be honest with you. The names of teachers and certain things, it's just not quite there as much as it used to be, which is a shame. But we are talking. This year, come what would it would be maybe May this year. It's 20 years ago since I left secondary school. Which is kind of hard to believe. I can't believe it's been that long. Honestly, but yeah, 20 years ago. I left secondary school. But it wasn't all bad. But again, I did have a lot of problems at secondary school as well. Probably partly because I guess probably I do have an element of autism about me. And I did have kind of learning deficiencies, let's say. I wasn't a particularly great student for all sorts of reasons, getting into a lot of trouble, fighting a lot of the time. There was this kind of almost like prison mentality at school thing going on a lot of the time with a lot of lads, and this kind of hierarchical kind of bollocks going on. Kind of everyone strutting their stuff kind of thing, everyone like trying to put people into their place, and like this whole ego bashing stuff, and there's a lot of bullying going on, a lot of banter. And so, secondary was, I enjoyed secondary school, but I had a bit of a difficult relationship with my secondary school years, because I liked being at school. I liked going to school because I saw a lot of people there that I was friends with, obviously, or rather, my friends were friends with. So I liked going to school because of that, and I liked getting out of the house because of my home life wasn't exactly ideal. So I didn't mind going to school. But I had a lot of dealing with a lot of just asshole types there. They caused a lot of problems for my parents, sadly. And everything else I can say, my secondary school was literally sat beside, very close to Headon Road, so it wasn't very far away from the docks. So again, you could, like I said before about primary school, I could hear the ferry sometimes. I could hear them even closer from my secondary school. And there were certain smells and certain sounds from, because it was literally like a caravan factory that sat besides. Because where our school field was in what used to be Isaac Newton School, there was a path there that used to be the Hornsey. I think it was the Hornsey line or the Withensey line, back in the 60s and 70s, I think, before it was pulled up and made into a bike track. And sat besides that was a caravan factory, which had these small tractors and things like that I used to see. And I just used to love that. I always used to love from the left. Like if you were stood at the back of the field and you looked to the left, you'd see like the main road. You'd see Hull KR, the rugby. Not predominantly just rugby, but it was rugby stadium, but also what used to be the speedway area, and also the greyhound racing stadium, basically, which was, I think now is predominantly just used for rugby now, I think. So that was sat literally right behind the school, the field, the main school field behind the school. So you had that right behind the field. To the left was the main road and what used to be Quicksave. Remember Quicksave? And then to the right was just factories, basically, that led on to basically led on to Headon Road, or very close to it. And so, like I said, is it Alexander Dock? I can't remember off the top of my head now. Well, there's a dock not too far away from our secondary school. And we went too far away from Marfleet, which was like a major area in the east of the city. Where we sometimes used to go there. I think it took about 20 minutes to walk down to there during our school lunches and stuff. So we had fun. Yeah, it was fun in many respects. It was. I remember playing. We had snowball fights and stuff like that. So again, primary schools, we had built snowmen. I had great memories of things like that. Like flipping like coins and things like that. Long before smartphones and things like that, social media really became a thing. Certainly before everybody had one. So it was a great time. I'm glad that I grew up at that time. But as far as education, which is what this video is supposed to be about, I just thought I'd kind of give you a bit of context, a bit of background of this whole thing. You got to remember that I grew up on a council estate. I grew up in the east of what used to be called Kingston upon Hull, which is now called Hull. And it didn't used to be, actually, only a few decades ago. It didn't used to be that rough of an estate. But probably somewhere in the 80s or 90s, it started to become a problematic estate with a lot of antisocial behaviour. And I unfortunately grew up in that time where that was becoming a major thing. We had this whole thing of this chaff culture, this youth culture thing going on at the time. And certainly by the time you got to the early 2000s, there was a lot of problems in the estate, a lot of antisocial behaviour. It wasn't common to see police around, the police helicopter circling around and things like that. It was a common sight. It was a tricky time because obviously, we were involved in post 9/11, of course. British military were involved in all sorts of stuff. I think Afghanistan, Iraq, and whatever. So it was a tricky time. There were a lot of I don't know. You had Blair's government in power, and I think they were kind of overspending, and it was. We had the development of the Deep in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. But apart from that, there wasn't really that much else going on. There was no really there weren't that, as far as I can remember, that many housing developments going on then. That happened a few years later on from that point. You had little things here and there, like road developments and things like that, but there wasn't really that much development going on in the city, apart from the Deep. Apart from the interchange that came into operation in 2007, a lot of things, there wasn't really that much going on in the city, for being honest with you, as far as like investment and things. So it was I guess you would class it as a kind of relatively, it was a city kind of stuck in stagnation and relative poverty, really. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. And so because of that, the councils, I think, probably didn't have enough money to really invest in decent educational facilities, and that sadly, unfortunately, that only became, it wasn't really until I think Cameron's government got into power, or the coalition government got into power. I think it was in 2010. I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was 2010. That's when a lot of like investment in new schools was coming about. So my school was demolished in its entirety. My younger brother's school was completely rebuilt. What's on the site of my old secondary school is now I think it's a school for students with learning disabilities, I think. And I think essentially what used to be part of the school is now essentially a training ground. I think it's an extension of the Hull KR stadium, I believe, anyway. So it's all changed, it's all obviously everything's moved on since I was at school, and thank God, it needed to. It wasn't ideal, and there's a lot of new housing developments going on now in the city. Anyway, I'm going completely off topic here. I'm going around. I'm trying to stay on topic, which is supposed to be about education, and it is, and I'm going to get to it now. So growing, having been brought up in this hardly ideal set of circumstances, meant essentially that schools like mine, like my secondary school, were somewhat dilapidated, somewhat kind of outdated, really. By the time I was a student there from 2001 to 2006. And it was obvious there just wasn't enough money to go around, really, for everything, to do on everything. There wasn't probably not enough teachers, and I think in hindsight, looking back on it, I think a lot of teachers were stressed out, or overworked, underpaid. That's probably still is today, I would imagine. Which is always shocking to me, really, when you think about the sheer effort and time that goes into teaching. It's criminal, really. It's a real shame. And as someone that, because, as I said before, because I wasn't particularly academically gifted, I think a lot of teachers, they didn't really see much potential in me. Not only me, but obviously many of the students in the class. And like I said before, I was getting involved in a lot of trouble, fighting, swearing. Just misbehaving, just not conforming, not getting along with certain students in the class for whatever reasons, just not particularly enjoying the class. And I think a lot of the time, one of the reasons I became so troublesome, certainly in maths classes, is because I had no interest. I just kind of didn't think, what was the point? I wasn't good at this topic. I was never going to be good at it. I wasn't just naturally gifted at certain subjects like science and maths. So I think part of me just kind of gave up in the end. But I think before I gave up, I kind of got the impression that teachers just didn't really care that much. And sometimes maybe I accept sometimes it was my fault because I was misbehaving. But there were times when I was behaving, there were times when I just felt that we had a teacher called Mr. Starr. I think it was spelled with 2 R's, I think. And I remember he used to go over to somebody, mostly he used to spend time with the girls in the right front right of the class. Me and my friend used to sit towards like the middle of the left side, and I don't know, we just never really got that much attention. Like he was more interested in speaking to them than he was anybody else in the class, from what I can remember. Like he just didn't seem that interested. It just was, and that's partly because they were the smartest kids in the class. See, and the reason I bring this up is because it's been something that kind of triggered this video, really. That it's a system that I don't really think works. It's a system in which everybody's essentially told that everyone's got. It's this kind of one size fits all approach to education. It's this kind of sort of uniformity kind of mentality of it, that everyone's essentially got the same, is going to have the same chances of having the same outcomes, which is just not the case. It's just not true. Not everybody is going to learn at the same pace as everybody else in the class, and that doesn't necessarily mean that people are stupid. It's just that they're just not as quick to learn things as other students. They might not be as intelligent as other students, but they're not stupid. It's just that they're just slower learners. They might need to be told things 2 or 3 times or in a different way than they tell other people so they can get it. But of course, teachers don't have enough time. They only have a certain period of time which they get to teach a particular topic in a major subject, and in a massive subject like maths or science, or even in English or whatever. There's so many things that you've got to teach, and you've only got so much time to do it. And so the teachers, of course, are going to prioritise spending time with the more gifted students, or the students that have got more potential, in their opinion, than others. So I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult to think about it because it's not always necessarily that the teachers at fault. It's the system in which they operate that's the issue. Because as we all know, that students have different learning styles. Some students will learn faster than others. Some students are better behaved than others, which obviously contributes to things as well. And I think at the end of the day, I believe that there should be some kind of mechanism in place, basically, that says, if a student's failing, if a student's not doing well in a particular subject after a period of time, I believe that they should then essentially be called into an office, a teacher's office or whatever, or the headmaster's office or whoever it is, and just have it laid out to them. So that, you're not particularly competent at this topic, and instead of you wasting your time and the teacher wasting their time, would you like to do something else? Would you prefer to be studying something else? And they should be given some options. That's what I think. And if they do want to learn that particular subject that they're not, if they think they might be better suited to learning it in a different way, then maybe they can have some after school classes. Maybe I don't know how it would work exactly, but I think it would be a better system rather than teachers, just. I think as well, I think probably teachers often feel guilty for it because they want to help everybody, but they also have to face reality, and that is that not every student in their class is interested in that particular topic, is smart at that particular topic, and quite frankly, some students just don't have a lot of potential in that area, but they're probably very good at other subjects. And so I think there should be some kind of a system in place that helps people to some kind of mitigating way of doing things in this regard that actually helps students to find things, to focus on things that are actually worth their time and are actually that motivates them to want to go to school. Because I think there's nothing worse than going to school to have to, by law, be present in certain subjects on certain days that you don't want to be there for, you're not good at, and you're not making any progress in. Because, and also it makes the teacher look bad as well. That's the thing, because it's like, well, if everyone's not getting the same grades, then the teacher often gets the flak for it, which I don't think is fair, because, like I said, different students have different capabilities. They learn at different rates. Some are more just more enthusiastic, more motivated than others, etc. So it doesn't really work. I don't think this whole system of dump 40 students into a classroom and expect them all to do well, but it's a competition system, you see, essentially, although it's not called that. It's a system of survival of the well, it's not so much survival, it's a system of, it's just competition, isn't it? It's competition. It's, the ones that get the better grades will have better chances in life often. And those that don't, well, that's tough shit for them, kind of thing. That's the general attitude of a lot of comprehensive schools, I'm afraid. Certainly the school that I went to anyway, that were on my estate or surrounding certain parts of the city. And it's sad because it fails kids. It's a complete, I think it's a negligent system, because it basically means that a lot of students fail in many ways, because they spend days, weeks, months learning something that they're just not good at, quite frankly, just kind of shit at. And it's not necessarily always that it's their fault, it's just that they're just not naturally gifted at something. And you can try as hard as you want, but you're not. And so at the end of that year or whatever it is, you're going to end up taking your, I don't know, whatever it is, your SATs or your GCSEs, and in some of the subjects you're going to end up with, an E, a D. It's like, what's the point? What's the point of it? Why bother? Why, you might as well take subjects that you actually have more of a passion for, or an interest in, or you might be better, potentially better capable of getting a good grade. And I think that would be a better way of doing things, in my opinion. And I think that's something that should be part of education systems today. I really think that. I think in a way, I think a lot of generations of students will fail, actually, quite frankly. Not just because of the kind of backwards narrow-mindedness of the narrow-minded system that's in place, but the kind of this lack of empathy, this lack of care, this lack of almost a lack of duty, almost. This sense of, well, if you're failing in life at school, then that's your fault. And it might be your fault. It very well could be. You're misbehaving, you're getting into trouble. But if people aren't given guidance, if people don't see role models around them, if people aren't given opportunities to change and to better themselves, then they won't. Because people, students often go to school partly because they're told it's a legal requirement, they have to go to school. And I'm not saying that kids shouldn't go to school. I think it's a good thing to go to school. I think it's a good thing to get an education. I think it's a good thing, obviously, to learn about socialisation. It's good to, we all need to learn about human nature, and that's where it really starts. It starts in childhood, teenage years. We have to learn because it helps us to, develop into adults. So of course school is important, but how school functions, I think in my opinion, is outdated, and I just don't think it works for a lot of kids, and I think because of that, a lot of kids think to themselves, "Fuck it, I'm not going to bother going to school. There's no point." There's no point. I'm not getting good grades. I'm not going to get any good grades in these major topics, but of course we're all told, you must get good grades in science and maths and English and whatever. And it certainly, of course, it helps to get good grades. It certainly helps if you want to go to college or university or whatever. But sometimes, as much as school is important, I think sometimes it can also be. It's overstated. I think it's exaggerated a bit too much. It's like, it's like, oh, well, if you fail at school, then you're going to fail in life. It's like, well, I don't really think so. It's like, you can always go back to college. You can always go to university. You can always take other classes. You can always do online studies now as well. So I don't, maybe back in the day it would make it more difficult for you, but these days I don't think that's quite the same thing at all, really. But the problem is again, it's just that it's probably a lot of it comes down to short-sightedness. It's a lack of, I don't know, it's probably just a lack of creativity in whoever designs, whichever institutions design the educational system as it is, whether that's designed partly by the schools and certain regulatory bodies. I don't know how it works, but whatever the case may be, I think it needs a massive overhaul. We need a massive shake-up of the education system to make it a much more effective and efficient system, so that less people fail. Less people. To make it so that more people have a better chance at making something of themselves. Because I think a lot of people leave school with nothing. They don't leave with any real meaningful knowledge, really, any real meaningful skills, unless you plan on going to college or university. But not everybody is. Not everybody will. Not everybody wants to. Not everybody has a reason to, quite frankly. And not everyone can afford it as well. And I think, given that a lot of these, like, a lot of kids, like, can relate to me in my upbringing, whether that's growing up on a council estate or growing up in a household that was particularly troublesome for all sorts of different reasons, as I've kind of alluded to a few times in other videos. They need support. They need guidance. They need direction. They need hope. They need to see that there's a future there for them. That there's something. There's a reason for them to want. That you've got to make kids want to come to school. That's the thing. It's like you've got to drill it into them that, like, this is it. It's benefiting you. It's going to help you, and it will. It will help them if they have the right support. And I think that's the thing that's lacking. It's there's not enough support, and there's not enough of the right support for kids, for troubled kids that have grown up in, broken homes of one kind or another. Whether that's to do with drugs, whether it's to do with domestic abuse, whether it's in single parent households or people's student parents who are going through a divorce, or there's affairs going on, or whatever it might be, financial troubles, unemployment related factors, etc. Those kids need help. Those kids really do need help, because not everyone at school, not everyone that goes to school is as bad as the teachers think they are, is as a lost cause like they like to think that they are. They're just lacking in support, they're lacking in guidance, they're lacking in... They don't have role models. They need role models to get on. And I sometimes think, maybe I was lucky. I was lucky that at primary school, that Mr. Vokes encouraged me, that at secondary school I had the encouragement of Mr. Bennett, and Miss Green, even John Everington, God rest his soul, to some extent as well, if I'm being honest, because I think he respected me, actually. I think he liked me. I think he was a good man, actually. it's sad that it's passed away. I think it was a year or 2 years ago now, I think. But it's a shame. But I was lucky that I kind of had a bit of guidance. And while I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't gifted in any academic way, or I was interested in certain subjects, I wasn't particularly. I didn't excel in anything really, but I was supported. I was encouraged. People had faith in me, or people at least tried to convince me that they did. And that matters. That matters when you're a teenager. That matters when you're a child. You know, when your parents don't provide you with that stuff, that matters. That's real. You know, that optimism that is so important to you. And it can really shift your perspective. It can really shift your mentality, and it can make you push yourself. It can make you believe in yourself when nobody else does. When you've lost all belief in yourself, because you know, you're going through the difficulties of puberty. You're dealing with bullying. You're dealing with, you know, acne, all that kind of stuff. You know. Worrying about what you're going to do when you leave school, you know, dealing with issues at home, issues on the estate, issues down the street, whatever it might be. You know, I grew up it was turbulent. It was I grew up in a difficult existence, and while I don't sit trying to make myself some kind of victim or anything, it was difficult. It was hard, and that had a big impact on my school life. And so not only is it just the education system that needs a complete overhaul, a complete rethink, we need a revolutionary model, I think. We need a massive change to the education system. And that probably also needs to include how the police deal with antisocial behaviour, and whether some kind of curfew system needs to operate on councils, troubled areas of council estates, maybe for kids under a certain age, maybe, I don't know. You know, certainly the police need to have more powers, the councils need to do more, and comprehensive schools need to have more staff, they need more funding, they need new, probably regulations, they need to be much stricter, I would imagine. And you know, we need a complete overhaul. I don't know how else to put it, but it needs a massive overhaul, because it just doesn't work for a lot of people. It doesn't work. You know, if you're gifted, if you're intelligent, which often comes from genetics predominantly, then you've already got. You know, I'm not saying that your life's going to be easy, but you've got it easier than other people because you've got a better chance of getting on with it because you're smart. You know, if you're already smart and gifted at science and maths and whatever, it's going to make your life. It's going to place you a couple of steps ahead of other people that don't have that and aren't as lucky. And you can say, well, it's about hard work, but it's not just about hard work. It's not, because if you're not intelligent enough, it doesn't matter how hard you work. You know, at the end of the day, you know, if you don't have the capabilities to get certain grades, then you're not likely to get on. You're not going to be in the best classes. You're not going to end up in the best courses that you might want to do at college. You're not going to get onto the degree programs you want, and you're probably not going to get into the career you want. Because it all depends on the status of your education and what grades you've got, and just generally how intelligent you are. So that it does matter. Yes, of course, hard work is a component of it, but the nature thing, the role models, you know, people believing in you, people giving you time, people giving you the chance to learn, people giving you the chance to learn at your own pace, that matters. Rather than this rush approach to education, which is often how it is. You must, the most intelligent will learn, and that's essentially what education is set up for. It's essentially set up for the smartest among us. It's basically there for those that have got the capabilities to learn at the speed in which the system operates at. And if you're not able to operate that system, the system speed, then you fall behind and you get left behind, essentially. That's basically what happens. And that's why I keep saying, people get left behind, people get forgotten about. And that's a travesty. That's a tragedy. It's wrong. It's morally wrong, and it doesn't need to be like that. Everyone should have a chance. Everyone should. You have to meet students where they're at in life. You have to meet them at their level, at where they are cognitively. You can't expect everyone to work at speed 8 when most of them are only capable of working at speed 4 or 5. It just doesn't work. That's just how it is. That's just people have the limitations, and you have to confront that reality. That's just how it is. And it's sad because so many students get labelled as being stupid, and then of course all of this stuff gets internalised, and the students start to believe it. Well, I'm not getting a good grade, so I'm stupid. I'm a failure, and it fucks you up. Sorry to swear, but it really messes with your confidence and your self-esteem. Because if you keep getting told you're not good enough, you're not getting a grade, then of course you believe that you're not good enough, and then you stop trying. Then you give in to apathy, and then you've given up. Then you're no use to yourself, and teachers can't help you because you've given up. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't. So it needs to change. It has to change if we're to give more people a chance at having a better life, or at least giving them more potential to have better opportunities to have a better life. Because if we don't, then those people fall in the cracks. And that often means then they end up on drugs, they end up in prison, they end up in down and outs, alcoholics, unemployed for long periods of time. Mental health problems, of course, become prevalent. And that doesn't help anybody. And I think essentially that's what's happened in a lot of these deindustrialised towns and cities, is that's basically what's to blame. It's decades of this stuff. And I personally believe a lot of it, while of course people do make their own decisions and choices, the things that are there that are supposed to help people that aren't really helping people. And I think it's just all a lot of things are doing, whether it's with the education system, whether it's with the welfare system, which is of course another whole completely corrupt and inadequate, ineffective, downright negligent, downright a failure of policy to deal with all sorts of issues. None of these things are helping people really. And they're not meant to. Why? Because we're told there's not enough money. There's not enough money around. So we have to do things in a way that's cost effective. But then you end up decades later with problems with high unemployment, with people living on this thing of welfare dependency, as we'll keep getting told. Well, it's not really dependency, it's just apathy, because people give up. And the reason people give up is because no one believes in them, because they don't believe in themselves, and the welfare system doesn't support them in any real meaningful way, except to tell them to massage the CVs, to apply for English jobs they're not going to get because they don't have the skills. They've been unemployed too long, they might not be that smart, they haven't got a CV that stands out, so they've got no chance, most of those people. That's just a cold, harsh reality of it. And so that doesn't help either. We need to have I think, if anything, what we need to do is we need to have a system in place in which probably schools and colleges kind of combine, basically. I think that would be the right thing to do. And basically you stay in education until, I would say, probably your early 20s. That's what I would do. Given that people are living longer now as well, I would say that you continue through education up until, say, 20 or 21, and then that's it. And so college is just an extension, just a few extra years of school. So instead of it being, the cut-off point is usually year 11, Now it would be year 15 or whatever it might be, I don't know, whatever, year 16. So, and after that, you can then go on to do a degree or whatever, or maybe you can do the degree while you're in college. I don't know how it would work, but I think we need to have a system in place that says that it's not wise to let people leave school at 16. They're too young. It's just too young. Even 18, I think it's too young. In this day and age, people are living longer, and I'm certainly given the instability of the employment market these days, and given where we're likely heading in the future with new technologies, I think we're going to have a really major rethink of how we do things in England. I think things have got to change because it doesn't work. I don't think you can let students leave school at 16. They're too young. They're too immature. They don't have the developmental skills yet to deal with life, and they're not often educated enough. They're not ready for the world of work. They're not ready for higher education. So really, they probably should stay in education, I believe, until about 20 or 21 years old. And I think that would be a much wiser thing to do. So, yeah, I mean, there's multiple angles to this whole thing. And I think, as much as you've got to address the problems of education, you've got to address the problems of social deprivation, economic deprivation at the same time. Because, excuse me, if you don't deal with those wider inequalities or those wider issues of negative behaviours, mental health problems, drug addictions, domestic abuse, etc., you can change the educational system as much as you want, but in the day, in many ways, education, as they say, starts at home, and it does. And I think, maybe even to a certain extent, kids should have the choice at a certain age where they can decide for themselves whether they want to essentially be allowed to be fostered. Whether that's in one's early teens or late teens, mid-teens, I don't know, whatever. But, there may very well could be a point where if someone feels that their parents are not good for them because they're addicted to drugs or whatever, or, there should be some mechanism which children have the ability to go into foster care. And sometimes, quite frankly, and I shouldn't probably say this on here, but I sometimes wish I wish I'd have gone into foster care, because I think my life could have turned into something very different. I probably would have gone down a very different route in life, but that's life. That's it is what it is. In hindsight, it's 2020. Who knows how things will panned out? But that's a whole different thing in its entirety. So this whole thing comes down to, we need to get serious about education. We need to give kids a future. We need to give them hope. Because quite frankly, I think a lot of kids that I grew up with, they didn't see any hope on the horizon. It was a kind of a gritty time, the 90s, 2000s still. There was, like I said, there was hope, but it was certainly when I grew up, it was a gritty time. It was a time of It was a time of instability. It was a time of, there was a lot of anxiety around. I remember that in the early to mid 2000s, obviously after 9/11, that things had changed. There was a kind of eeriness in the atmosphere. There was a kind of sense that the world's unsafe. And I think certainly after 7/7, London, the country's never really, I don't think, has ever fully recovered from those things, to be honest. I don't know. I just think that we operate in outdated systems that at one time may have been effective to some extent, but now they just don't work anymore, and they need to change. If you really want people to get on in life, you give them opportunities, you give them reasons to work hard, you incentivize people to work hard, you incentivize people through smart ways of what you do is you have a system that has backup mechanisms for students who are failing in certain areas. That's what you do. And then you push them into different areas where they might potentially succeed. That's what you've got to do. But until there's enough will to do it, there's enough money there's enough resources, nothing will change. And people will, as always, be left behind, will like I said, fall between the cracks. And I think that's something that we should be deeply ashamed of, should be deeply embarrassed about, should be I think it's immoral. It's immoral to fail, to let people essentially fail. What people do outside of school, once they finish education, that's none of the school's business. But while people are in school, the school, I believe, has a duty to do its utmost best to do whatever it can to support every individual student as best as it can within its own means. I accept there's only so much money to go around and everything, but I think it starts with ideology, it starts with framework, it starts with how you deal with things. And if something's not working, change it. If a student's not doing well, take them out of it. Don't keep them in that class. Whether it's because of bad behaviour, whether it's because of other students that are interrupting them, causing problems, you deal with it. That's actually one of the reasons why I ended up moving out of one class and I got put into another class. In English, I got taken out of, I can't remember her name now, she was quite young, and I think she married somebody called Mo Queen, I think his name was. I think she got married to another teacher, Mr. Mo Queen. Can't think of her name. She lived on my estate, she had glasses, quite a young woman. And anyway, I basically was in another class and I got taken out of, I think it was her class or another class, and I got put into a different class. Even though technically I probably shouldn't have been, because I wasn't quite up to the grade for that class, I don't think, from what I can remember of it. But I was taken out because I complained about behaviour. Now that probably was an exception, that probably wasn't what they normally did, but things like that need to become normal. Things like that should be, it should be normal for kids to have more empowerment in school, not for them to feel like, the teachers are right up there and we're down here kind of thing. It should be that, of course, students have to respect authority and leadership and things like that, but they also have to feel like they're being taken seriously and that their education, as much as it is down to themselves to succeed, or at least try to, it's as much their duty, their responsibility, as it is the schools as well. The problem is there's too much emphasis on you need to be accountable. You need to respond. Yeah, true. But if someone's failing, if someone's not succeeding in something, it's just it's a no-brainer. You don't keep them in that class then. Or you have that student needs to have special extra classes after school. But that's not often what happens. Most students don't get that. Most students are expected to learn at the pace in which that teacher teaches that topic within that 1 hour, 1 hour and a half class, whatever it is. And often a lot of teachers don't have assistants with them. So the assistants, and there's often too many students in the class anyway. And let's face it, let's have the truth. You're only going to have a very small fraction of students within any group that are going to be the most capable. So the rest of them are basically playing catch up. And that's why a lot of students get poor grades or don't even get really much of a grade at all. That's why so many students fail, why so many students get Fs and E's. That's how the grading system used to be when I was at secondary. And most of my grades were were C's and D's, I think, from what I can remember. So I don't think, while I certainly wasn't, I didn't have any kind of prowess academically, I wasn't a complete failure. But again, there were a lot of reasons behind that, and I think you've just got to work with what you've got at hand. You've got to, like I said, you've got to meet students in realistic ways. But like I said, without the money, what can you do? What can schools do? What can councils do if there's not enough budget there? But it's not just about budget. It's really about attitudes. It's about perceptions. It's about how students. We've got to get away from this negative view that all students that are brought up in council estates are somehow troublesome, yobs or they're up to no good or whatever. I think you've got to give kids more respect. You've got to give them more positivity. And it's hard for teachers because they're so stressed out from everything. And it's a complex issue, and I accept that. And there are a lot of things that need to change. And but is there enough will? And sometimes I don't think there is. I think it's just that it's a survival of the most intelligent, isn't it? It's a system. If you can't keep up, well, good luck. Such a shame. It just doesn't need to be like this. It doesn't need to be like this. You've got to give people hope. And if you don't give them hope, they're guaranteed to fail. We'll catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.